we're going to start with some voice acting, or in my case, sounding like a complete tit.
Mm.
Then we're going to time stretch it. I changed the rate to around 0.25. Oh, and make sure to allow for the pitch to change with it, because trust me, you're going to want the pitch lowered for this. I've used saturation to add back some of the overtones that were lost when we time stretched it and changed the pitch. Then added a bit of some pretty fucking hard compression. Attack and release quite low, but the ratio on 4, so I'm kind of using it like a limiter, since my threshold is pretty high as well, but some of that sound is being let through. It's added a bit more grit, and it's made this like controlled some of the lows, but we'll get onto that. Basically, I still wasn't happy with the dynamic range, even after the compression I did, so I added a multi-band compressor just to tame some of the lows, and there was a mid region that also was spiking a bit, just didn't like, so I used it kind of like an EQ, I guess. After all that saturation and compression, the noise floor was brought up tenfold, and I had to try and EQ some of this out. I rolled off some of the highs, but I also used this EQ to highlight a certain part of the sound that I wanted a little bit more in, around 3K, and so that when it went into the reverb caught more of that. But I also used this EQ to highlight some of the sounds that I wanted more, so that when it went into the reverb, it enhanced those and not the shit sounds. The reverb I've used here is subtle, but I think it brings some life to the track, because after all the time stretching that just kind of sounds a bit robotic. This did, however, change the tone of the sound a moderate amount, so after this I added an EQ. Okay, so I haven't really gone into detail on the EQ yet, but here's why. See, when I was experimenting with the sound, trying to get the tubey kind of fishbowl effect I mentioned earlier, I used the Convolution on Isotope's Trash, and it sounded great. It added some real beef to it as well, which I didn't have before. Also, it helps to make him sound like he's in the fishbowl type diving suit that he is. Don't know what the fuck you call that, but yeah. The only problem with this was it didn't have the definition that the sound I'd made just before it had. So, to counteract it, I did some parallel processing. I then added an EQ to both tracks, which is why I didn't speak about it specifically before. See, I made space for each of the two tracks to separate them a bit, and highlight parts of them that sounded better than others. This, however, wasn't the case for the bass frequencies, as I tried to do the same, but it just wasn't as thick or dense as when I boosted both of them in slightly different ways, but still the same region. The fishbowl convolution effect added some different overtones that just weren't in the standard version, so they complemented each other really nicely. I then added another high-pass filter to take off the highs, which were causing a lot of like unwanted noise again. And then finally I balanced out the two tracks by reducing the second track by about 8 decibels. This was because the bass was a bit overpowering in the end. Here's a process of it all together at once. And onto that noise that's been really annoying me the whole time. There were 2 ways I went about this. First was chopping the tracks down into the parts that were useful. The second was I could either use the RX6 spectral denoiser to get rid of all of it basically, but the only problem with this was it meant that some of the high end was gone too. So basically this is your choice. I like it with the high end, but I think it sounds a lot cooler. But if it came down to it and it was distracting, I would take it out for sure. Comparing my sounds with the sounds that are actually in Bioshock. You will tell that they're a lot more cartoony. The high-end grit is much more prominent in mine. Theirs is a lot more low, mid, heavy, which makes it coherent with that whole soundscape, so there's no complaints there really. If I didn't explain anything properly, feel free to ask. But other than that, yeah.